I think it's fair to say that if money was no object, most hi-fi enthusiasts would opt for a fully balanced amplifier. I'm not talking about one with balanced inputs or outputs, but one which is balanced internally as well. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll explain later, but basically a balanced amplifier has additional circuitry to eliminate noise. More circuitry means more cost, so they don't tend to come cheap. I've reviewed a bunch of them, the musical Fidelity M8S Pre and M8S500S. That's a 500 watt per channel powerhouse. The combination of those two will set you back £7,500. The Burson Soloist 3X GT preamp and Timekeeper 3X GT monoblocks with 180 watts per channel of Class AB power retail for a similar amount in the UK. The Denafrips Hades preamplifier and Thallo power amp sell for about £4,500 in the UK, sold directly by Vinshine Audio and also dealers like Willow Tree Audio. What all those amplifiers have in common is exceptional levels of clarity. Now I credit that down to topology. Today I'm taking a look at Yamaha's entry fully balanced amplifier. The A-S2200 retails for £3,750 in the UK, but can regularly be found on sale for just below £3,000. Now I know that's still an awful lot of money for most people in this hobby, but compared to some of the fully balanced amplifiers that I've reviewed in the past, it's potentially a bargain. I had to find out if that's the case or not. The unit I received came in black, but I much prefer the silver finish on these vintage looking amplifiers, with VU meters to evoke nostalgic feelings from the past. The build quality here is impressive. This thing weighs in at 22.7 kilograms or 50 pounds, with chunky gloss black side panels and a thick anodized aluminium front fascia. There's a switch to take the AS22 out of standby, a dial to adjust the headphone gain from -6 to +12 dB. You can select between two sets of speaker terminals, none or both. The eye-catching VU meters can show peak levels in decibels or volume units that better represent how we perceive sound. The dimmer function is pretty cool. The illumination of the meter automatically changes. You can move the dial when you see the brightness level you desire. There are adjustments for the bass and treble by ±10 decibels. The smart thing is that when set to 0, the audio signal automatically bypasses the tone control circuit. You can also alter the balance between left and right speakers. The smaller rotary knob is the input selector, which includes a balanced input. The AS2200's phono stage can be switched for moving magnet or moving coil cartridges. The audio mute switch doesn't fully mute the device, just reduces the volume by circa 20 decibels. Finally, there's a larger rotary dial to adjust the volume. Strangely, the supplied remote control came with a silver aluminium plate, even though the unit is black, but it's a nice weight and size with clearly laid out buttons. As I alluded to earlier, you can connect two sets of speakers to the AS2200. The terminals are a weighty pure brass affair. The balanced input can be attenuated by -6 dB and the phase inverted for the hot and cold pins if required, to offer greater flexibility of connection to sources. 3 line level RCA inputs are labelled tuner, CD and line 1. The line 2 input includes an output for recording devices. There are 2 sets of pre-outs to connect to an external power amp or powered subwoofers, and below the phono input for turntables. You can decide whether you want the amplifier to go into standby or not, and finally there's some connections for system integration and servicing. Before I get into the balance topology, there's some key Yamaha technologies to explain. Their mechanical ground concept has the power transformer, block capacitors and heat sinks bolted directly to the chassis. Their feet have bolts also welded to the chassis. They're made from solid brass and silver plated. Okay, silver plating feet is a bit of an extravagance, but the rest of it's there to maximize rigidity and reduce vibrations. The Yamaha amp uses thick wires for ground connection to keep the overall impedance of the circuitry in the amplifier as low as possible. Also, compared to a conventional amplifier where the output transistors have the positive terminal connected to the power supply and the other connection to ground, the AS2200 has a floating balanced power amplifier. Both connections are taken directly from the power supply, hence the floating term. This reduces the ground loops and the potential for noise and hum. Let's take a look at the internals in a little bit more detail. The central brace provides extra structural support and some damping for the top cover. I'm going to start with the volume control on the front board. It's a resistor ladder which should provide a more linear response across the volume range in comparison to when a traditional potentiometer is used. The power supply is fed by a huge 620 VA toroidal transformer. I've seen many amplifiers at this price with transformers about half that size. The filter caps are also larger than what you typically get. They're Yamaha branded Nippon caps, each rated at 22,000 microfarads. Top quality parts. The combination of the toroid and these caps means that the AS2200 should have plenty of current in reserve to deal with transient attacks. The power amp modules are mounted directly to the heat sinks. There's an identical power amplifier module mounted on the other side, so this part of the AS2200 is dual mono, a topology that you often see on more expensive amplifiers. Officially it's rated at 105 watts per channel into 8 ohms, 190 watts into 4 ohms, and even has a 2 ohm rating, so you shouldn't have any difficulty driving tricky speakers. The AS2200 has balanced circuits all the way from input to output, including the preamplifier section here. That requires twice the parts in the signal path, as you're carrying not just one signal on the hot line, but an out of phase signal on the cold line. Any noise added by the amplifier will be common to both and thus can be compared and eliminated, a process known as common mode rejection. Out of sight, below this board, is a fully discrete phonostage. The overall characteristic of the Yamaha AS2200 is very similar to other fully balanced amplifiers that I reviewed in the past. That is, excellent levels of detail, but tonally veers towards the cool and analytical side. That's true of the Burson Soloist 3X GT and the Timekeeper 3X GT monoblocks, also the musical Fidelity MAS Pre and the MAS 500S power amp. It's not quite as dry and clinical sounding as the Denafrips Hades Thallo combination that I reviewed though. Bass is superbly well defined, but I would like a little bit more weight. It robs the Yamaha of that last bit of muscularity and dynamic impact. Bass notes stop and start so quickly that it has no problem tracking fast percussive elements even when things get frenetic. Rock and fans of big orchestral works are very well catered for. What is equally as impressive is the instrument separation in the mid-range. The sound extends well beyond the speakers laterally, and there's enough depth for me to confirm that it's only bettered by the very best tube amplifiers in its class. Everything in the soundstage is laid out precisely. It helps that there's so little bleed through from the bass into the mid-range, and that leading edges of notes are defined so tangibly. But in order to image precisely, the Yamaha needs to preserve timing cues in the upper registers. It does this. The treble sits in nice balance with the rest of the frequency range, well extended, without tipping into brightness. But the AS2200 takes no prisoners when it comes to revealing harshness in your recording or the rest of your equipment chain. That isn't my main criticism though. My main criticism is there's a touch of lightness to the overall presentation. It's a trait that it shares with the Accuphase E280 that I recently reviewed, another premium Japanese amplifier that retails for a smidgen under £5,000 in the UK. The Yamaha has much better bass control than the Accuphase, but the E280 hits back with better refinement in the mids and highs. It has an ability to lay out performers in front of you in an even greater holographic way, whilst maintaining more effortlessness to its musical presentation. What both amplifiers have in common is a lack of body or harmonic richness in the mid-range, which would flesh out vocals and lead instruments in a more realistic way. The Yamaha in particular could benefit from a little bit longer decay to the end of notes as well. Before I get into how to get the best out of the AS2200, there are a few other comparisons I should mention though. The Hagel H190 is likely to be cross-shopped, even though at £3,300 it comes with a very good DAC and basic streamer. I consider the Hagel to be a totally neutral amplifier, and I back up that claim with experience. It works with more speakers than any other amplifier I can think of, whilst the H190 has the body in the mid-range that the AS2200 lacks, and can match it in sound staging ability. In most other areas of performance, it's a level below when it comes to imaging, instrument separation, and believe it or not, bass control. Before someone mentions it, yes, I am aware the H190 has a 4000 damping factor. The Marantz Model 40N is still here. That's a 70 watt per channel Class AB amplifier with a very good internal DAC and the HEOS streaming platform, which is more comprehensive than the Hagel's. At £2,200, it's considerably cheaper, especially when you cost in the streamer, but the Model 40N has that distinctly warm coloration that some people may prefer to the AS2200, but in terms of overall sound quality, the gap between the two is considerable. I'm sure someone will ask me about the Yamaha AS1200 that I reviewed in July 2021. At £2,500 with 90 watts per channel into 8 ohms of Class AB power, it looks better value, especially when it's regularly on sale for less than £2,000. Now, the AS1200 is not a balanced design, and a lot of time has passed between these two reviews, so I can't make any detailed comparisons. Other than that, I have the Hagel H190 here as a common point of reference. I noted that the AS1200 is just a touch cleaner, but distinctly leaner in presentation to the H190. I could argue that case for the 2200 as well, but I'd wager that the difference in clarity is much greater and the difference in leanness less so. Make of that what you will. I'm not going to drag out this section any longer than it needs to be. The Yamaha AS2200 is a plug-and-play device. I have nothing meaningful to add in terms of setup. Despite having a coloration on the analytical side, it isn't excessively so. The AS2200 worked well with a wide variety of speakers. Because the ELAC Unify reference UBR62s were still on my stands, the three-way monitors were the first speakers that I tried. Andrew Jones' parting gift from his ELAC tenure is a warm-sounding speaker with a slightly dark sonic profile. It was tempered nicely with the Yamaha for those of you looking for a more balanced presentation. Now, I don't think it's likely that people are going to pair a £750 set of speakers with a £3,750 amplifier, but if other, more price-appropriate Yamaha amplifiers in the range have a similar sonic characteristic, then it bodes well for them. My ProAct Response 1SC speakers have the most revealing mid-range of all the speakers I tried. It isn't a bad pairing, but this is where the lack of body in the mid-range relating to vocals and lead instruments was most apparent, and that's the reason why it isn't a combination I could live with. I was a touch reticent in hooking up the Amphion Argon 1s, which are still the best speakers I've heard for £1,300, but also can have a tendency to sound analytical. I needn't be concerned. The AS2200 allowed the Argon 1s to do their thing, which is sound clean and dynamic. My favourite pairing by some margin was the Dali Minuet SEs, compact monitors that retail for £1,500 and still represent my benchmark near-field monitor. The Minuet SEs aren't quite as open in the mid-range as my ProActs, and that's why the amplifier's clinical nature wasn't quite so obvious. The little Dalis are still very revealing and have just enough romanticism to balance the Yamaha perfectly. Sometimes things just gel together in ways which I can't fully explain, and that was the case here. The Yamaha AS2200 has the kind of build quality that premium Japanese amplifiers are coveted for. If looked after, it should last generations. And do I need to mention those VU meters? The level of clarity on offer here sets a new bar for me for amplifiers below £4,000. It has excellent abilities to lay out a space in front of you in which performers sit. There's people who'll crave more harmonic richness, me included, and more bass weight to get the juices flowing. I'm very impressed with what is offered. The AS2200 has almost everything I could expect from a great balanced amplifier. The Yamaha AS2200 gets a highly recommended from this channel. My question for the day is, what do you think about balanced topology? Is it something that you'd like to try, or something that you've tried and got experience of? And if not, what other routes are you looking at as upgrade paths? Please let me know about that in the comments section. All that remains for me to say is, if you like what I'm doing with this channel and you want to see it grow and you haven't done so already, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Check me out on Patreon for consultancy services there, as well as join the ABA Club on Patreon, which has a bunch of benefits, including a very active WhatsApp group, video calls that we will have face-to-face periodically, as well as bonus content. But for today, for now, a British Audiophile, signing off.